A black boy interrupts a judge in court, and what he says leaves the judge pale and everyone in the court speechless. The courtroom was silent, but the tension in the air was unbearable. All eyes were on a black boy, just 12 years old, who, with unexpected courage, interrupted the judge right in the middle of the hearing. He said 2 words that made the most imposing man in the room lose color in his face, as if he had seen a ghost. But who was this boy? Why did his words have such an impact? What had he gone through to get to that moment? What seemed like an ordinary audience hid a dark truth. The story of Mateus, a boy who survived the abuse and neglect of his adoptive parents, brought to light the darker side of family life. Behind the walls of an apparently tranquil home, there were stifled screams, violence disguised as discipline, and a pain that no child should have to endure. Before we dive into this moving and revealing story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your opinion in the comments. Your interaction can make a difference in the fight against injustice. Mateus was a quiet boy who rarely looked people in the eye. At school, his teachers noticed that he always seemed tired and distracted. But it was his teacher Carla, with her keen sensitivity, who noticed the signs that others ignored. The clothes that were always too baggy to hide marks, the averted gaze when someone asked about his home, and the rehearsed excuses to justify minor injuries. Mateus lived with Rogerio and Patricia, his adoptive parents. To the neighborhood, they were the perfect couple, always smiling and participating in community events. But the reality was different at home. Rogerio was authoritarian, with angry outbursts that made Mateus cringe with fear. Patricia, although not as physically aggressive, used words as sharp as knives, gradually undermining the boy's self-esteem. "You should be grateful," she would say, while pushing a plate of simple food towards Mateus. "If it weren't for us, you'd be on the street." Rogerio, for his part, controlled every aspect of Mateus' life. He said he was shaping the boy into a real man, but all he did was impose fear. When Mateus made small mistakes, like forgetting to wash the dishes, Rogerio made a point of punishing him so that no one would see the consequences. It was on an ordinary morning that teacher Carla decided to take action. During a group activity, Mateus got distracted and let his shirt ride up slightly. Carla saw a purplish stain on his back, which he quickly tried to cover up. She didn't say anything at the time, but called the boy to talk after class. "Mateus, are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but full of concern. The boy shook his head, trying to smile. "Yes, teacher. I'm fine." But Carla knew he wasn't. It was the same answer she had heard before from other children facing difficult situations. She decided to investigate. She spoke to other teachers, who mentioned Mateus' withdrawn behavior, and went to the school's social worker. Meanwhile, at Rogerio and Patricia's house, things were becoming increasingly tense. Patricia began to notice that Mateus was quieter than usual, as if he was plotting something. "Don't you think he's acting strange?" she commented to Rogerio over dinner. "He's just a boy," Rogerio replied dismissively. But even so, he began to be more attentive, keeping a close eye on Mateus. At school, Carla encouraged Mateus to talk about what was happening. At first, he denied it, saying that everything was fine. But over time, he began to confide in her and tell her little pieces of his story. "They don't like me," Mateus said one day, while playing with a pencil in his hands. "They only pretend when there are people around." Carla knew she had to act fast. She started documenting everything Mateus said and the signs she saw. She looked for support at school and alerted the authorities. Meanwhile, Rogerio and Patricia began to suspect that something was wrong. One day, Rogerio found Mateus writing something in a notebook and snatched the paper out of his hands. It was a school essay, in which Mateus described an invisible monster that controlled his life. Rogerio was furious, but Patricia convinced him to stay calm. "If we act now, we'll arouse suspicion," she said. "Let him think he's in control." Little did they know that Mateus had already decided to fight. Inspired by Carla's words, he began to record everything that happened at home. He recorded conversations, took photos of marks on his body, and hid everything in a safe place. Carla, for her part, collected all the material and handed it over to the authorities. This is how the case came to court, where the truth would finally be revealed. The courtroom was packed that morning, with every seat occupied by onlookers, lawyers, social workers, and even journalists. The story of Mateus, the boy who dared to stand up to his abusive adoptive parents, had caught the attention of the whole city. But even with everyone's eyes on him, Mateus felt his stomach turn as he waited on the bench next to his teacher Carla and the lawyer assigned to represent him. On the other side of the room, Rogerio and Patricia were impeccably dressed. They smiled at the jurors, waved to acquaintances in the audience, and exchanged whispers of complicity. Anyone who saw them would believe that they were the perfect adoptive parents. But Mateus knew the truth. And that was the moment to expose everything. The judge entered the room, imposing an immediate silence. He was a middle-aged man, with a serious look and a rigid posture. He called the case to order, and Rogerio and Patricia's defense lawyer was the first to speak. "Your Honor, my clients, Rogerio and Patricia, are examples of kindness and generosity. They opened their doors and their hearts to a boy who needed a home. But unfortunately, this boy, traumatized by a difficult past, began to create stories to sabotage the only family that took him in." The lawyer's words sounded rehearsed, and each sentence was like a stab in the heart for Mateus. He looked at Carla, who squeezed his hand, whispering, "Stay strong. The truth is on our side." Rogerio was the first to take the stand. He looked directly at the judge, with the expression of someone who was about to tell a touching story. "Adopting Mateus was an act of love," he began, his voice soft and full of false emotion. "From the start, we knew it wouldn't be easy. He came from a complicated home and needed a lot of support. We did everything for him, from therapy sessions to private lessons, but he never managed to trust us." Patricia, when called to testify, used the same tactics. She feigned tears, said that she loved Mateus like a son, but that he was difficult and that all they wanted was to help him overcome his past. On the other side of the courtroom, Mateus' heart was heavy. Their words were so convincing that he began to doubt whether people would believe him. But when Carla's lawyer stood up, the tide began to turn. "Your Honor," Mateus' lawyer said firmly, "what we will see today is a different story. A story of abuse, manipulation, and neglect. We will present evidence that unmasks the true nature of this couple." The decisive moment came when Mateus was called to the witness stand. He walked slowly there, his legs feeling like lead. He sat down, looked around and saw the serious faces of the jury, Rogerio's cold expression, and Carla's encouraging gaze. "What would you like to say to the court, Mateus?" asked the lawyer calmly. Mateus took a deep breath. "They're liars," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "They pretend to be good people, but at home they treat me like dirt." There was a murmur among the audience. The judge raised his hand, asking for silence. "Go on, Mateus," encouraged the lawyer. Carefully, Mateus began to tell his story. He talked about the shouts, the punishments, the cruel words that made him feel smaller. He talked about the day Rogerio pushed him against the wall for not cleaning the house properly. And then, with trembling hands, he showed the court the recordings he had made. The room fell silent as Rogerio and Patricia's voices filled the room. "Do you think anyone will believe you, kid?" Rogerio's voice echoed in the recording. "You're just another dead weight. If it wasn't for the money we received, we wouldn't even have you here." The evidence was a bombshell. Every recording, every photo of the assault marks on Mateus, every financial document showing the misuse of the benefits received to look after him, were displayed. Rogerio and Patricia's perfect mask began to crumble. But the most impactful moment was yet to come. Patricia seemed petrified, as if all her rehearsed words had evaporated into thin air. Rogerio, on the other hand, was red with rage, his mask of tranquility completely destroyed. He leaned forward in his chair, casting a threatening glance at Mateus, but the boy held his head high. He knew that, at that moment, he needed to be stronger than ever. "Your Honor, I would like to call the next witness to the stand," announced Mateus' lawyer. All eyes turned to Carla, who stood up calmly. With firm steps, she walked to the witness stand. As soon as she sat down, the lawyer started asking questions. "Ms. Carla, as Mateus' teacher, what led you to believe that he was living in an abusive environment?" Carla adjusted her glasses and took a deep breath before answering. "I observe my students on a daily basis, Your Excellency." With Mateus, it was clear that something was wrong. He always seemed tired, had trouble concentrating, and often arrived at school with marks that he couldn't explain. But what worried me most was the way he reacted when we talked about family. He always got tense and avoided the subject. The lawyer nodded. "And you decided to take action?" "Yes. I tried to win his trust. I asked him how he was at home, but he seemed too scared to talk. Then one day, he finally told me what was going on. That's when I decided to go to the school board to report my concerns. And during that time, did you notice anything else? Carla paused before answering. Yes. Whenever Mateusz missed school or was late, he seemed even more withdrawn. He even told me that his adoptive parents used the money they received for their own luxuries, while he went hungry or was forced to wear worn-out clothes. I knew I had to help him, but I also knew it would be difficult. That's when I suggested that he start gathering evidence. The lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Carla's statements, as well as the records presented earlier, as evidence that Mateusz's environment was clearly abusive and neglectful. The judge nodded, his expression serious. The evidence will be accepted. At that moment, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every word spoken seemed to weigh tons. Mateusz's story was unfolding clearly and devastatingly, dismantling the facade carefully constructed by Rogerio and Patricia. But still, the defense lawyer tried to react. Excuse me, Your Honor, he interrupted, standing up. With all due respect, we must consider that Mateusz may be exaggerating or even inventing these allegations. After all, he is just a child, while my clients have an impeccable record of collaboration with the adoption system. The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Mateusz stood up abruptly, his heart pounding. All eyes turned to him. Mr. Mateusz, said the judge, surprised. Is there anything you'd like to add? Mateusz felt the weight of everyone's attention in the room, but with the courage built up over so many difficult nights, he stepped forward and said, his voice firm. They don't see me as a son. To them, I'm just a bank account. A murmur went through the room. Mateusz's simple, direct words resounded like a blow to every person present. Rogerio slammed his hand on the table, trying to get up, but the security guard stopped him. The judge raised his hand again, asking for silence. He looked directly at Mateusz. You're very brave, young man. Please continue. Mateusz took a deep breath and continued. I may not be an adult, but I know the difference between love and interest. And what they do isn't love. They lie, they shout, they hurt, and they only pretend to be good people when there's someone watching. Everything they've done has been to cheat others and keep getting the money that was supposed to go towards looking after me. At this point, Liam, Mateusz's best friend, was called to testify. He told about the times he saw Mateusz with marks of aggression, about how Mateusz trusted him to tell him the things that happened at home, and how he encouraged him to talk to Carla. Mateusz is strong, but he shouldn't have to be that strong, said Liam. He just wants to be treated like a normal kid, and these people never gave him that. With each new witness and piece of evidence presented, Rogerio and Patricia became more tense. They could no longer hide their discomfort as the truth unfolded in front of everyone. When the judge called a recess to deliberate, Mateusz felt as if the air had become lighter. He returned to the bench next to Carla and Liam, who gave him encouraging smiles. Although he was still nervous, he knew he had done the right thing. Everything was now in the hands of justice. When the judge returned to court after the break, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone present was anxiously awaiting the decision, while Mateusz kept his eyes fixed on the judge, holding Carla's shoulder to reassure himself. Rogerio and Patricia, on the other hand, were pale, clearly uncomfortable. All the confidence they had shown during the trial seemed to have dissipated. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at Mateusz before starting. His voice sounded firm, but there was a tone of empathy. After carefully reviewing the evidence presented, including the testimonies of Mateusz, Carla, Liam and others involved, as well as the financial records and recordings, this court concludes that Mr. Rogerio and Mr. Patricia acted negligently, abusively and fraudulently with regard to Mateusz's well-being. Their actions violated not only the trust placed in them by the foster care system, but, above all, the fundamental rights of a child who should have been in their care. The judge paused, allowing his words to echo around the room. He then turned directly to Rogerio and Patricia. Rogerio and Patricia, your actions are not only morally reprehensible, but also criminal. Not only have you failed to fulfill your duties as foster parents, but you have used the system to your own advantage while neglecting and abusing Mateusz. Therefore, I order that you be immediately removed from custody of Mateusz, and your adoption rights are permanently revoked. Additionally, the financial records presented indicate a clear violation of laws related to the use of funds intended for the care of adopted children. Rogerio, you will be arrested for financial fraud and child abuse. Guards, take him into custody now. 2 officers approached Rogerio, who began to protest. This is absurd. This is all a lie. But his voice was drowned out as the guards handcuffed him and escorted him out of the courtroom. Patricia began to cry, but the judge remained impassive. As for Patricia, her complicity is equally reprehensible. Although you are not the main perpetrator of the financial crimes, your negligence allowed the abuses to take place. You will be investigated for your participation and will not be able to serve as legal guardian of any child again. This court considers your actions equally serious. Patricia burst into tears, but no one in the courtroom seemed moved. Mateusz watched everything with a mixture of relief and emotion. For the first time, he felt that he was being heard. The judge turned his attention to Mateusz. Mateusz, I want to recognize the extraordinary courage you have shown by standing up and sharing your story. Your strength and determination are remarkable. This court not only believes in you, but is committed to ensuring that you are placed in a safe and loving environment. He paused before continuing. I understand that changes like this can be difficult, but I hope that you will see this as the beginning of a new opportunity to build a life where you will be cared for and respected as you deserve. Carla squeezed Mateusz's shoulder and whispered, You did it. We're all proud of you. The judge then turned to Carla. Professor Carla, your dedication to Mateusz and your courage in bringing this situation to light were exemplary. The system needs people like you. I'm sure Mateusz will be eternally grateful for your support. An emotional Carla replied, He's the one who had the courage, Your Excellency. I just did what any adult should do. The court was adjourned, but Mateusz's life was just beginning to change. After the trial, Mateusz was temporarily placed in Carla's care while the legal formalities were sorted out. Carla and her family opened the doors of their house to him, offering not just a roof over his head, but a home. On his first night at Carla's house, Mateusz was greeted by a welcoming dinner. The table was full of dishes he had never imagined he would taste, and Carla's family treated him as if he were already part of them. After dinner, Carla showed Mateusz his room, a simple but cozy space with a comfortable bed, a small bookcase full of books and even a whiteboard where he could draw or write. Mateusz stood in the doorway, trying to process it all. It was so different from what he was used to. Carla noticed his hesitation and said with a smile, This is your new home, Mateusz. Here, you're welcome and you'll be looked after. Slowly, Mateusz began to open up. Over time, he learned to trust again, to smile without fear and even to dream of a future that had previously seemed impossible. He began to excel at school, encouraged by Carla and his new classmates. The courage he showed in standing up to his abusers became an inspiration to other students facing their own difficulties. Years later, Mateusz was on stage at a graduation ceremony, about to receive his diploma. As he looked out into the audience, he saw Carla and her family giving him a standing ovation. He paused, took a deep breath and picked up the microphone. A few years ago, I thought life would never be different, that no one would hear my voice or believe in me. But thanks to people who really cared, I was not only saved, but also given the chance to start again. Today, I want to dedicate this achievement to them and to all the children who are still waiting for a voice to defend them. Never stop believing that things can change. The audience gave Mateusz a standing ovation as he descended from the stage. He knew the journey had been difficult, but it had made him stronger and more determined. And so a story that began with suffering and injustice ended with hope and the promise of a bright future. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, comment and share it with your friends. Stories like this remind us of the importance of fighting for justice and humanity. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this.